longer exist. And I think that we've identified that with what we're doing technology-wise and how we're developing the next warfighter and our services, in addition to what China and Russia is doing, that technologies, service models, products, organizational designs, hierarchies, education models, they all fade. But what he talks about is underneath that is that invisible advantage. And that invisible advantage lies underneath those technologies and those kind of tangible platforms. And that is our culture. Culture is that invisible advantage that if we develop that, if we mature that, then it quickly becomes that fourth strategic offset that allows us to fight and win our nation's wars. And I think that's important. So a couple of things that I'm going to go over here just to kind of set the stage as we get into some of the context and we need to move forward on is that culture, when we look at diversity, is quickly becoming that next buzzword along with innovation. What are we doing? What are we doing diversity-wise? What are we doing innovation-wise? And so diversity, along with our core values, forms the bedrock of that culture, and that's very important as we move forward. And so as we look at that particular topic, we need to understand that every organization is charged with creating that diverse force. And so what we're going to cover today is we're going to go through the background, which we've been covering, talk about our problem statement, lines of effort that we have in play that we think that leadership needs to look at a little bit more in depth in the sense of applying a little bit more flavor and a little more initiatives in some particular areas, and there are recommendations for the next class. So as you can see up there, we got a lot of different references, and so we do a really good job of guidance and doctrine when it comes to how important diversity is, and it's interwoven into all of those cornerstones that make up in the sense of what we're accountable for and what we can reference. And so early in 2016, Secretary James ended up pushing out our 2016 diversity and inclusive initiatives. A lot of those initiatives focused on family, they focused on recruiting, recognition, but one went after diversity of thought. And the goal of our platform right here is to really talk about diversity of thought. Some of those initiatives, and I want to go over them, are unique, and they were needed because we serve a unique Air Force, and we have unique experiences and dynamics that we need to address so that our warfighters are focused in on the mission. We increased funding to Air Force Reserve Officer Training Corps that allowed us to open up our aperture and be able to be more diverse as far as how we fund and who we apply, who we're applying and receiving scholarships to bring them in. Other things we did is we encouraged minority groups and females to serve in career fields that lack that amount of diversity. We ensured that leadership services were engagement to ensure that we went after the dual spouse, and we heard a lot of stories when it comes to that dual spouse and that dynamic. So all of those are diverse situations and experiences that we as warfighters and as airmen experience. A couple of others, we looked at balancing career or families with new children, reducing the bureaucracy and obstacles for individuals serving in communities that have maybe disabilities or medical issues, encourage civilian participation in civilian education and PME, which I think that is a big boost. And we also looked at providing diversity, inclusion, recognition programs. But the one initiative that went after diversity of thought was provide unconscious bias training materials prior to key leadership events. And I think that's very, very important. You're going to see how we recognize that in what we do. So as you're going to look at the background, diversity is really a big puzzle piece of a jigsaw puzzle. How do we get that right? What is that formula? What is that sweet spot in order for us to be optimal, in order for us to be lethal and effective? And so diversity has just as much to do with optics of race and gender and religion as it does in directly influencing every institutional competency from the tactical, operational, and strategic level. And it's very important, but we feel it starts at that tactical and operational level. And so we look at demographics, we look at globally what we're doing, we look at organizational structure and cognitive behaviors and ask ourselves, from a diverse standpoint, what do we need to get after next? And it's how we're developing individuals to be better problem solvers, critical thinkers, to manage self-awareness, critical thinking, so that they're more effective leaders, and they have that aptitude and the ability to make decisions and to lead our airmen. And all that influences promotion, problem solving, and the gamut of things that we end up doing in our platforms to develop that next leader. So that leads us to our problem statement. Now, our problem statement up here came down to two questions, but what we'd like to do is just go over it briefly. We looked at, based on the research from class 19B, it led our team to ask, has diversity become the new military mantra? And a diverse force, is a diverse force an actual better fighting force? If so, by what metrics? How do we measure that? How do we measure diversity and its impact on making us more lethal in what we do? What are the advantages and disadvantages of a culturally diverse force? Can a truly diverse force be created in a fair manner? And that are fair questions. I think those are the questions that we're asking, that when we make the business decisions in our work environment, are we more focused on the optics of that or making sure that individuals are the right person for the job? And then lastly, is there a sweet spot for how diverse an organization should be? So when you look at the two questions that we're looking to answer with our lines of efforts and our recommendation, they come down to what are the advantages of a culturally diverse force, and what are the challenges of leading a culturally diverse force. So our lines of efforts are listed, and I'll provide some context under each of those that I'd like for us to be able to discuss. We look forward to your feedback, and we can continue to mature these, scope these, and move them forward for the next class to be able to research and be able to apply their efforts. So one of the key words that came out from our class was weaponizing. Do we have the ability to weaponize diversity? It is about developing airmen. It is about their lethality and how sharp we make them and how influential. But we also understand that certain AFSCs are better at the tactical level because of the skill sets that they have. But we train those particular skill sets. But we need to look at sharpening a leader's ability to think, lead, and problem solve differently. And so our first one is increased emphasis on overcoming challenges related to diversity of thought. And we've done that in this platform, and I know we're starting to do it in some of our lower levels of PME as well. But what are we doing at the tactical level in the organizations to expand that education platform when it comes to emotional intelligence, self-awareness, resilience, that personal ethos to be able to critically think, problem solve, and make decisions, and understand other strengths and weaknesses. It's a huge part of our leaders leading at that next level. But also make a focused effort on areas to where, how do we apply these tools, when and where do we apply these tools as well. A lot of these briefings we talked about diversifying our toolkit. And so it's great to have a toolkit, but it's even more effective if we understand how and when to use those tools that are part of our toolkit. And then the third point under that line of effort is make senior hiring promotion decisions based off cognitive maturity as well. We have individuals that are great in their functional communities, but we're asking them to lead individuals at a higher level. And part of that comes with being mature and developed in that diversity of thought. Our second line of effort is to indoctrinate diversity and remove biases consistently across career spectrum through recruitment, selection, training, and development. Some context there, we go back to developing and hiring systems that are a mixture of commander selection and skills relating to the key positions that we put individuals in. In our class, we also talk about from a recruiting platform to be more deliberate and intentional with not just meeting goal, but also looking to see where are we meeting those goals from. If I have two schools that are my B schools that produce my quota, what am I doing with those third, fourth, fifth schools that sometimes we're not visiting? So when we look at that, how can we expand an aperture and be able to drill down and more diversified in how we meet diversity in the sense of who we're recruiting, but also not just who we're recruiting, that we're recruiting individuals that bring in different perspectives as well. And then the third that we have up here is identify at-risk organizations. And so those are those high-tempo environments, cyber, defenders, medical, that in those environments have the ability to be stressed out because we understand that stress in those communities and those situations do impact our ability to make decisions. And a key point here is quick decisions restrict our ability to make effective decisions. So we ask for our lines of efforts focused on diversity of thought. And some of our recommendations moving forward are as follows. Now, looking at the research for this, in class we did a tremendous job of going out and looking at evidence-based research, best practices, and what the industry is doing. They researched 17 different articles. But a lot of those articles were swayed towards what are the positives of being a diverse force. It's very hard to go out and read whether it's Harvard or Mitt Sloan or even something from one of our sister services or our Air Force on what are the disadvantages of a diverse force. Everything does shift towards a positive outcome. But what we want to make sure is that we're fair in our assessments and our recommendations moving forward. So our first recommendation would be to explore negative results related to inorganically grown diversity. And so are we spending a lot of time focusing on how an organization looks versus the thinking styles within that organization? And so I think it comes down to that we need to stop looking at the math equation and make this more of a perspective equation. So how do we get rich perspectives to be able to balance that diversity of thought in an organization? Second is explore how other services are managing diversity and results. As we shift towards more joint environments, what are our sister services doing to create more diverse cultures and thinking and leadership behaviors organically in their organizations, but also infusing that with education throughout an individual's career to help them expand for those enhanced leadership roles or just those peer-to-peer roles. But also to look at developing networks with sister services and community partners to explore relationships that lead to collaborative partnerships. You know, we've done a tremendous job of partnering with the industry. We had an opportunity to go down to MGM Works. I personally worked with CyberWorks, AFWorks, and we put collective minds together to be able to innovate and generate the next warfighting platforms. But an interesting thing happened when I was at the Medical Wing. We had a spark event that included about 20 different AFSCs, over 7 groups and 100 airmen, and I say that airmen big A. And most of the innovative ideas that they came up with were what are ways that we can increase leadership engagement, what are ways that we can increase communication in the organization, and all those come down to diversity of thought, having leaders equipped to be able to problem solve, critically think, and address issues at the front line that lead to better problem solving. And so this last one is use the same institutional competency measurements that we put in place to evaluate diversity of thought. And I think that's a big challenge that we have across the Air Force is how do we measure that diversity of thought? How do we measure critical thinking, emotional intelligence? Because if we don't know how far we've come, we won't know if we're getting closer to what we're trying to achieve. And that is very, very important. We measure what we value. So developing those measurement systems, whether that's structured interviews, whether that's a scorecard for different answers that are given back, but how do we measure the ability for that individual to serve at that next rank when it comes to their cognitive maturity? So the last thing I want to talk about is diversity means pulling together enough points of view to get out of our echo chamber and have a chance of building and doing something that our airmen are going to value and that's going to allow them to develop to the next level. And so I want to thank you for this opportunity, thank my class for this opportunity to give me this podium moment, and at this time, I'll go ahead and field any questions. Questions from the class?
Hey, so I just wanted to, first of all, to share with the rest of the group kind of the approach that this flight is taking with this. So this is part of an iterative effort, right, that we're working on to ultimately get to a work